Welcome back to Pragmagilism, the podcast where we cut through rigid frameworks and focus on what actually works. I'm Ross, and today we're diving into a topic at the crossroads of strategy and delivery. Can financial planning coexist with agility? Budgeting is a critical part of running any organization, but not all budgeting methods are created to be equal. You have zero-based budgeting, where every dollar needs to be justified annually. Activity-based budgeting, which allocates resources based on the cost of specific activities. Value proposition budgeting, which ties spending directly to delivering value. And incremental budgeting, which tweaks last year's budget with minor adjustments. Each method has its pros and cons, but here's the big challenge. How do you balance the need for structured financial planning with the flexibility that Agile demands? Today we're exploring why traditional planning methods often clash with the Agile principles, how this tension impacts teams and leaders, and practical strategies for making financial planning a little more agile. Because here's the thing, it's not about throwing out the budget. I know a lot of people think Agile has no plans, but businesses have to plan. It's about rethinking how we plan so that we can stay adaptive in a changing world. Why annual financial planning creates tensions with agility. The core problem is that annual financial planning locks organizations into rigid budgets and priorities, making it hard to adapt to changes in the market conditions, customer needs, or business strategy. Why it's a problem? Once the budget's set, teams are often forced to stick to it, even when priorities shift. A fixed budget doesn't adapt well with changing realities because a budget is something that's also a reality. So how do you work with what you learn as you learn it? How do you change your plan when there's an explosion and that explosion impacts the fixed budget? It encourages short-term thinking. So teams may focus on spending the budget instead of delivering value efficiently. And they may focus on doing the list of things that were planned for in the budget instead of doing the things that are actually going to provide the customer and the business the most benefit. And it stifles innovation. Rigid budgets make it hard to experiment, innovate, or take advantage of emerging opportunities. A lot of management believes those things are risks, but those risks actually can help us build a better product. While I was at a fintech company, annual planning meant 60 managers and senior managers went to an offsite for a few days, and they decided the scope for the year based on what they thought it might take from a man-hour perspective without any representation from the folks who actually do the work, know the ins and outs of the code, understand the architecture. They may have understood the business and the needs and the architecture at a high level, but they didn't have the ins and outs in the day-to-day. Maybe they did 10 years ago when they were still developing code, but now they're management and they've been disassociated from the ins and outs for a few years. The plan was briefed to shareholders and approved as if it was set in stone without the opportunity to learn about the plan or do any experimentation. When it started, it inevitably started to fail. The workers, not the planners, were the ones blamed for not staying on plan. This created a deep distrust between the teams executing the work and management, making it harder to collaborate or pivot when things went off track. This tension impacts teams and leaders. Teams feel trapped by budgets that don't reflect what's actually going on. The needs to modernize, needs for tech debt remediation, customer incidents, or anything else. Basically, the budget was the plan regardless of what was going on all around us. At a very large enterprise I worked with, there was an agreement to set aside 15% of capacity for tech-only initiatives. So things that tech folks found, modernization, application upgrades, whatever it may be. In practice, though, this capacity was frequently eaten up by product managers trying to get more feature work in. When that happened, tech management would often bypass product management entirely, sneak hidden whip into the backlog, and left the engineers caught in the middle, confused about who to listen to. The product managers who were responsible for the product, or the tech managers responsible for the team's careers. This lack of clarity not only caused delays, but it also created a toxic dynamic between teams and leadership. For leaders, we got caught between the need to deliver results and the constraints of the financial realities and the things that the teams were learning. Rigid planning processes made it nearly impossible to maintain trust, collaboration, or alignment across teams because the senior leadership and the shareholders and whoever else heard those commitments were expecting their things on a specific timeline, regardless of what was going on. Can financial planning be more agile? I didn't mean to sound like Chandler Bing there, but I kind of did. Shifting to a more agile approach can happen. Rolling budgets instead of annual budgets. This one seems less available in a lot of large organizations, but doing a quarterly budget or a biannual budget and changing the priorities. This creates room for flexibility while still maintaining a sense of control. Fund outcomes, not line items. This one may be a little more doable. You can allocate budgets or goals to goals or outcomes rather than specific features or functionality. Instead of budgeting for marketing campaign, just budget for customer acquisition increase by 15%. This may include marketing campaigns, different sales strategies, new sales technology, new marketing technology for that matter. And that way your teams can be more fluid in how they achieve that customer acquisition. Create an opportunity fund. This is another thing that you can do where you set aside some money that if somebody comes up with a new go-to-market approach or a new product and you want to do some R&D work, you can do that with that fund. Fund teams for time periods. This is a different way to look at things, but instead of saying, I'm going to fund this list of things, say, I'm going to fund this team for 6 months. Then when you start going, you can, just like in SAFe, where you say, I have an Agile release train, we're going to work for an increment. You can fund that Agile release chain for that increment. While working in a large government contracting firm, our teams created a model where the government could buy an Agile release train for a defined period of time. As part of launching these trains, scope would be ironed out during program increment planning at the beginning of the contract. So they would say, okay, we're going to staff these teams for X amount of times. The government would come in, the contracting firm would come in, the engineers would come in, and they did a PI planning for a few days. This set the scope for the 3-month iteration. By the end of the release, we had a shippable product. The funding model allowed for both predictability and adaptability. The government knew what they were getting for what they were paying, and they set a scope agreement with those teams who understood the architecture. This was a great example of how you can use something from Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprise, and you can set it up as a way to fund your business and say, we're going to fund these teams for this amount of time, and then we'll negotiate the scope as we learn. Annual financial planning and agility don't have to be at odds if you're willing to rethink how you plan. I know a lot of us have heard of rolling wave planning, zero-based budgeting, all these different terms, but really, most large enterprises are doing annual planning where they look at last year's budget and they change it by a set percentage, and then they try to fit as much stuff in there as possible. A lot of times, what we spend as a business is more important than what we make. If you hear about targeting expense numbers and things like that, that's really what we're talking about. Does it matter what we're spending? Of course it matters what we're spending. But, profit and margins and things like that are not just about cutting expenses. It's how do we seize opportunities to make more revenue? How do we provide that flexibility to the teams and really get to a place where we can rethink how we plan? Rolling budgets, funding outcomes, using time-based funding models like Agile release trains can make financial planning more agile. I know that an Agile release train may not feel agile to some of us who aren't SAFe, but whatever it is, a less product structure, fund a set of teams in a product line, whatever terminology you want to use, fund the folks for a set period of time, negotiate the scope once those people start working on the specific outcomes that you're looking for. Collaboration between the folks and leadership is critical. It's critical. And you need that influence in your financial planning. Whether you're doing annual planning or not, You need the folks that are closest to the work to really help you understand what the costs of these large efforts might be. But the smaller we can make the things that we do, the quicker we can get it in the hands of our users, and the more we can learn from it. Doing things that are smaller and less time really help us achieve that agility, whether it's funding or through a different mechanism. Maybe you have a plan and you're going to be flexible about it, and you're not going to just wait for your list of stuff and get mad when you don't get every widget you ask for. That's another thing that we can do as leaders, is really say, here's what I'd hope to achieve, and here's the bet I'm going to make on hoping to achieve that. Let's line it up with our OKRs or our goals, and let's see what you can do. But being flexible to understand that things happen and plans change. Planning is not the enemy of agility. The real challenge is making sure your planning process supports agility and doesn't hinder it through being adaptable. Have you struggled with this tension between annual planning and agility? What strategies have worked for you and what hasn't worked? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can contact me on socials or through our email. Next time, we are going to be talking to Dan Parsons and his specific topic about challenging what's dogma or pragmatism with forcing structures or focusing on collaboration. I'm really excited to talk to Dan about it on our next episode. Thank you all so much for listening to Pragmagilism. Remember, tools not rules, outcomes not traditions. Be pragmatic, not dogmatic. See you next time.